The stars had always seemed peaceful to Admiral Cole. She remembered being a little girl in Montana, lying on the grass behind her grandmother's house and counting the tiny lights in the sky. Back then, she had dreamed of exploring those distant worlds. She had imagined friendly aliens and wonderful adventures. Now she stood on the bridge of the USS Sentinel, humanity's only warship capable of traveling between stars, and she knew the truth. The universe was not friendly. The universe was ruled by those who took what they wanted from those too weak to stop them. The message from the Hegemony Council had arrived 6 months ago. Still remembered the exact moment when the translation software finished processing the alien transmission. She had been drinking coffee in her quarters, reading a book about the American Revolution, when Commander Daniel Hayes knocked on her door with a pale face and trembling hands. The Hegemony, the vast coalition of 17 alien species that controlled this part of the galaxy, had finally decided what to do with humanity. They wanted 40% of the human population. 8 billion people lived on Earth. The Hegemony wanted to take 3 billion of them and scatter them across labor colonies on distant worlds. Men, women, and children would be separated from their families and forced to work in mines and factories until they died. This was normal, the Hegemony claimed. Every new species paid the price of admission to galactic civilization. Humanity should feel grateful that the Hegemony was being so generous. Earth's unified government had spent 2 weeks debating the response. Politicians argued about the military strength of the Hegemony. Scientists calculated the odds of resistance. Religious leaders prayed for guidance. In the end, the decision was unanimous. President had stood before the cameras and delivered humanity's answer to the stars. No. Smiled slightly at the memory. She had watched that broadcast from the Sentinel's bridge, surrounded by her crew. When the president said that single word, every person on the ship had cheered. They knew what it meant. They knew the Hegemony would not accept refusal. They knew war was coming. But they also knew that humanity would not bow. The Sentinel was not much compared to the warships of the Hegemony. It measured just under 1 kilometer from bow to stern, armed with that fired tungsten rounds at a fraction of the speed of light, protected by energy shields that could withstand moderate weapons fire, and powered by a fusion reactor that humanity had considered revolutionary just 10 years ago. Against a single Hegemony patrol ship, the Sentinel might stand a chance. Against the fleet that was now gathering to punish Earth for its defiance, the Sentinel was a pebble facing an avalanche. Lieutenant Grant sat at the tactical station, her fingers dancing across holographic controls as she ran yet another combat simulation. She was young, only 28, with short brown hair and eyes that never seemed to rest. Had promoted her to the position 3 months ago after her previous tactical officer retired. Had proven herself capable under pressure, but sometimes caught her staring at the sensor readings with barely hidden fear. The sensors showed the Hegemony fleet assembling near a star system called, about 40 light-years from Earth. Intelligence officer had intercepted communications indicating that over 400 warships were being gathered from 6 different species. The Empire alone had contributed 300 vessels, each one larger and more powerful than the Sentinel. They had sent 50 of their famous destroyer-class ships. Even a species known for their reluctance to engage in warfare, had provided 20 support cruisers. 400 ships against one. Approached with his latest report. He was a thin man in his 40s with glasses and a habit of speaking very quietly, as if he was always sharing secrets. In his hands, he held a data tablet showing intercepted alien communications. "Admiral," he said, "the Hegemony High Ambassador has ordered the fleet to depart within 72 hours. They expect to reach Sol system in approximately 2 weeks." Nodded slowly. She had expected this timeline. The Hegemony was not known for patience, and their anger at human defiance had been growing with each passing day. Diplomatic channels had gone silent weeks ago. The time for talking was over. "What about the artifact?" she asked quietly. Glanced around the bridge before answering. Dr. Pierce reports that Project Awakening is 93% complete. He believes we will be ready before the fleet arrives. Felt a small spark of hope ignite in her chest. Project Awakening was humanity's only chance. 30 years ago, deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, a research submarine had discovered something impossible. An artifact made of materials that did not exist on the periodic table, covered in symbols that predated the dinosaurs by millions of years, pulsing with an energy that every known law of physics. The discovery had been kept secret from the public and even from most governments. Only a handful of people knew what the artifact truly was. A gift from those who came before. The precursors, as scientists called them, had seeded life across the galaxy billions of years ago. They had created the genetic foundations for every sentient species that now existed, and they had left behind tools for their final creation, their last children, to use when the time came. Humanity was that final creation. Turned to face the main, which showed the distant stars that had once seemed so peaceful. Somewhere out there, 400 warships were preparing to destroy everything she loved. Her crew was scared. Her government was scared. The entire planet was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But Cole was not scared. She was angry. She thought about the billions of people counting on her. She thought about the children who would grow up as slaves if she failed. She thought about every human being who had ever looked up at the stars and dreamed of something better. The hegemony believed that humanity was weak. They believed that one ship could not stand against their mighty fleet. They believed that fear would make humans submit like every other species before them. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Straightened her uniform and addressed her crew. "All hands," she said calmly, "prepare for combat operations. We move to intercept position in 6 hours." The bridge erupted into disciplined activity. Officers called out confirmations. Systems powered up across the ship. The Sentinel began its journey toward the edge of the solar system, where it would make its stand. One ship against the galaxy. Cole intended to make it count. High Ambassador Al had ruled the Hegemony Council for 300 years. His species, lived for nearly 1,000 years, and he had spent most of his life climbing the ranks of power until he sat at the very top. He had crushed rebellions on dozens of worlds. He had ordered the extinction of 2 species that refused to cooperate. He had built an empire that stretched across 10,000 star systems, and he had done it all without ever experiencing the sensation that now twisted through his 4-armed body like poison. Doubt. He stood in the crystalline chambers of the Grand Assembly on the Hegemony capital world, surrounded by representatives from all 17 member species. The chamber was designed to intimidate, with walls that rose hundreds of meters toward a ceiling made of living light. Delegates sat in floating platforms arranged in a perfect circle, all facing the central podium where Al delivered his pronouncements. For 300 years, every being in this chamber had obeyed his commands without question. Now they whispered among themselves, and he could not silence them. The human ambassador's words still echoed in his mind. Laura was a small creature by hegemony standards, barely 2 meters tall with soft brown skin and dark hair that fell past her shoulders. She had stood before the full assembly with no weapons, no guards, and no apparent fear. When Al had presented the terms of submission, she had listened politely. When he had finished speaking, she had smiled. That smile haunted him. "We do not negotiate with slavers," she had said. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the vast chamber. "Humanity will not surrender a single person to your labor colonies. Not one child, not one elder, not one soul. If you want our people, you will have to come and take them." The assembly had fallen silent. No species had ever spoken to the hegemony this way. Though a warrior race that prided themselves on courage, had surrendered 60% of their population when faced with the Council's demands. They had given 70%. Every species learned eventually that resistance was pointless. The hegemony was simply too powerful. But the humans did not seem to understand this. Al had responded with fury. He had called the human ambassador a fool. He had described in graphic detail what would happen to Earth if humanity did not comply. He had promised that the hegemony would reduce human cities to ash and scatter the survivors across the darkest corners of the galaxy. Laura had listened to his threats with that same calm expression. When he finished, she had nodded politely and spoken again. "You are welcome to try." Then she had turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving Al speechless with rage. That was 6 months ago. Since then, the High Ambassador had assembled the largest punitive fleet in hegemony history. 400 warships from 6 species, carrying enough firepower to destroy 100 worlds. He had personally selected Fleet Commander to lead the assault, a warrior who had never lost a battle in 2 centuries of service. Victory was certain. Al knew this in his mind. But his hearts were not so sure. Intelligence Chief N approached his platform with her latest report. She was a female, her scaled body covered in ceremonial armor that marked her rank. Unlike most of her species, N was calm and analytical. She dealt in information rather than violence, and her reports were always precise. "High Ambassador," she said quietly, "we have new intelligence regarding the human warship." Al gestured for her to continue. "The vessel has moved from Earth orbit to an intercept position at the edge of their star system. It appears to be alone. No other ships have been detected." N paused, her yellow eyes flickering with something that might have been concern. "However, our long-range sensors have detected an unusual energy signature emanating from the ship. Our science vessels refuse to approach close enough for detailed analysis." "Refuse?" Al's voice sharpened. "Explain." "The crews report feelings of wrongness when they enter scanning range. Several have experienced what they describe as waking nightmares. 2 have had to be sedated." N's claws clicked against her data tablet. "I have no scientific explanation for these phenomena, High Ambassador, but I recommend caution." Al dismissed her concerns with a wave of his upper arms. "Superstition. The humans have no technology that could affect our crews from such a distance. They are barely capable of interstellar travel. Their weapons are primitive. Their shields are weak. 1 ship cannot stand against 400. In bowed her head. "As you say, High Ambassador." But Al noticed that she did not look convinced. The punitive fleet departed on schedule, 400 vessels moving through hyperspace toward the distant yellow star that humans called Sol. Al watched them go from the observation deck of his palace, surrounded by advisors who assured him that victory was inevitable. The humans would be crushed. Their defiance would serve as an example to any other species that might consider resistance. The natural order would be restored. Yet as the fleet vanished into the darkness between stars, Al found himself remembering something his grandfather had told him centuries ago. The old had survived the last great war against the precursors, the ancient beings who had created all life in the galaxy before mysteriously vanishing billions of years ago. The precursors left children behind, his grandfather had whispered, hidden among the younger species, sleeping until they are needed. When they wake, the galaxy will tremble. Al had always dismissed this as legend. The precursors were gone, their technology lost, their purpose forgotten. No species in the modern galaxy possessed their power. But as he stared at the stars, he could not shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Somewhere in the cold void of space, a single human warship waited for his fleet. 1 vessel against 400. The odds were so absurd that they should have been funny. So why did Al feel like he was sending his warriors to die? He shook off the feeling and returned to his duties. There were other matters to attend to, other species to manage, other rebellions to crush. The humans were nothing, a minor annoyance that would soon be eliminated. The High Ambassador had no way of knowing that in 2 weeks, his entire understanding of the universe would be shattered. The children of the precursors were about to wake up, Dr. Pierce had spent 30 years of his life trying to understand the artifact. He had sacrificed everything for this work. His marriage had ended because he could not stop thinking about the strange symbols etched into its surface. His health had deteriorated because he often forgot to eat while studying its energy patterns. His hair had turned white and his hands had begun to shake, but his mind remained sharp and his dedication never wavered. Now, standing in the deepest section of the USS Sentinel, surrounded by equipment that translated ancient code into modern commands, finally understood what he had been given. A key. The artifact had been discovered in 2089, buried beneath the Pacific Ocean in a trench so deep that sunlight had never touched it. A research submarine mapping the ocean floor had detected an unusual energy signature and investigated. What they found changed everything humanity thought it knew about the universe. The object was roughly spherical, about 3 meters in diameter, made of a material that did not match anything on Earth. It was older than the planet itself, older than the solar system, older than most stars in the galaxy. Carbon dating suggested it had been created approximately 3 billion years ago, during an era when Earth was still a molten ball of rock without even the simplest forms of life. Someone had placed it there deliberately. Had been a young scientist when the government recruited him for Project Awakening. He had spent decades studying the artifact, learning its language, mapping its functions. The breakthrough came when he realized that the artifact was not a weapon or a tool in the traditional sense. It was a receiver, designed to connect with something much larger. The precursors had built a network throughout the galaxy, hidden in the fabric of spacetime itself. Every ship, every station, every piece of technology they created was linked to this network. When they vanished billions of years ago, the network went dormant. It waited for the right signal. The artifact was designed to send that signal. But it would only respond to a specific genetic pattern, the DNA of humanity. Still remembered the moment of revelation when he understood what this meant. The precursors had not just seeded life across the galaxy. They had designed humanity specifically to inherit their legacy. Every other species was a prototype, an experiment, a step along the path. Humans were the final product. The children meant to receive everything the parents left behind. Admiral Cole entered the artifact chamber, her boots echoing on the metal floor. She looked tired, which was understandable given the circumstances. The hegemony fleet was less than 48 hours away, and the weight of human survival rested on her shoulders. She said quietly, "Is it ready?" Nodded slowly. "The integration is complete. The Sentinel systems have been modified to interface with the precursor network. When we activate the artifact, the ship will connect to technology that has been dormant for 3 billion years." Stared at the artifact, which pulsed with soft blue light in its containment field. "And you are certain this will work?" "Nothing is certain, Admiral," smiled wearily, "but I have spent my entire adult life preparing for this moment. The artifact recognizes human DNA. The Sentinel has been modified to serve as a conduit. All we need is someone to give the command." Was silent for a long moment. Then she placed her hand on the control panel that had built around the artifact. "Let us begin," she said. The activation sequence took exactly 17 minutes. Had designed it to be simple, knowing that time might be short when the moment arrived. Spoke a series of commands in a language that had reconstructed from the artifact's symbols. Each word resonated with the ancient technology, causing the blue light to pulse brighter and brighter. On the bridge, Lieutenant Carter watched her sensor readings with growing amazement. Something was happening to the ship. Energy levels were climbing beyond anything the instruments could measure. The hull itself seemed to be vibrating at frequencies that should have been impossible. "Commander Hayes," she called out nervously, "I am reading structural changes throughout the vessel. The ship is being altered at the molecular level." Daniel Hayes stood at the command station, his face pale but his voice steady. "Maintain your position, Lieutenant. This is supposed to happen." But even he was not prepared for what came next. The USS Sentinel began to grow. New hull sections appeared from nowhere, materializing around the original structure like a cocoon forming around a caterpillar. Weapon systems that had never been designed by human engineers extended from the expanding frame. Shields of pure energy wrapped around the vessel in layers so dense that they bent the light of nearby stars. The ship stretched from 1 kilometer to 10, then 50, then beyond anything that human measurement could easily describe. Inside the artifact chamber, felt the change as a warmth spreading through her body. The artifact was connecting with her, reading her DNA, confirming that she was truly human. Ancient systems recognized her as a child of the precursors and granted her access to power that had slept since before life existed on Earth. The transformation lasted approximately 3 hours. When it was complete, the USS Sentinel no longer resembled anything built by human hands. It was a vessel from another age, a weapon designed by beings who had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. Its weapons could tear holes in the fabric of reality. Its shields could withstand the energy output of a star. Its engines could cross the galaxy in moments. And it obeyed Cole. She returned to the bridge, walking through corridors that had grown and changed around her. Her crew was waiting, their faces showing a mixture of fear and wonder. They showed the space around them and could see the energy fields that now surrounded the Sentinel. They were beautiful, shimmering curtains of light that danced among the stars. Captain Christopher Lane spoke first from his position at the weapons station. "Admiral, I am reading power levels that are frankly impossible. The main weapon alone could destroy a planet." Nodded calmly. "Then let us make sure we do not have to use it for that purpose." She turned to face the direction from which the hegemony fleet would arrive. Somewhere out there, 400 warships were racing toward Earth, confident in their superiority, certain of victory. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The Sentinel, humanity's first and only interstellar warship, had become something far greater. It was now a guardian, a protector, a promise made by ancient beings to their final children. Cole intended to keep that promise. Fleet Commander had never known defeat. In 200 years of military service, he had conquered rebellious planets, crushed enemy armadas, and personally executed 3 alien kings who refused to bend their knees to the hegemony. His ship, the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, was the largest warship in the fleet, bristling with weapons that could reduce continents to glass. Behind him flew 400 vessels crewed by warriors who believed themselves invincible. Then he saw what waited for them at the edge of the human star system. The Sentinel hung in space like a nightmare-given form. It was no longer the small vessel that hegemony intelligence had described. It had grown into something vast, something ancient, something that seemed to bend reality around itself. Energy fields surrounded it in layers of shimmering light, beautiful and terrible at the same time. The ship was larger than anything the hegemony had ever built, larger than stations that orbited capital worlds, larger than the asteroid bases that served as military headquarters. Felt something he had never experienced in 2 centuries of warfare. "Fear." "Commander," his sensor officer said with a trembling voice, "I cannot get accurate readings on the vessel. Our instruments are not designed to measure these energy levels. But I believe the human ship now exceeds our entire fleet in both size and firepower." "That is impossible," replied, but even he did not believe his own words. The communication system crackled to life, and a human voice filled the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. "Hegemony Fleet, this is Admiral Cole of the USS Sentinel. You have entered human territory with hostile intent. I am offering you one opportunity to turn around and return to your masters. Tell them that Earth is not theirs to take. Tell them that humanity will not kneel. If you continue your approach, I will be forced to demonstrate why you should have listened." Recovered his composure and opened a response channel. "Human, You may have enhanced your vessel with some unknown technology, but you are still only one ship. We are 400. Even if you destroy some of us, you cannot destroy us all. Surrender now, and perhaps the hegemony will show mercy to your species." There was a pause before responded. "I see. Then I suppose we have nothing more to discuss." The sentinel fired. A beam of light erupted from the human vessel, so bright that optical sensors across the fleet overloaded instantly. The beam moved with impossible precision, cutting a perfect arc through space that intersected 43 hegemony warships in less than 2 seconds. The ships did not explode. They did not burn. They simply ceased to exist, erased from reality as if they had never been there at all. The communication channels filled with screaming. Watched in horror as captains reported the losses. 43 ships gone in an instant, not damaged, not disabled, gone. The weapon that had destroyed them left no debris, no radiation, no evidence that 4,000 warriors had died in that single strike. "All ships fire at will," commanded, his voice cracking with desperation. The hegemony fleet unleashed everything it had. Plasma torpedoes streaked toward the sentinel in waves. Energy beams converged on the human vessel from every direction. Missiles carrying warheads designed to crack planetary crusts launched by the hundreds. The combined firepower of 400 warships poured into the space where the sentinel waited. It made no difference. The weapons splashed against shields that burned with the light of captured stars. Cole watched the assault from her bridge with calm detachment. The Sentinel's defensive systems absorbed energy that should have vaporized a fleet, dissipating it harmlessly into subspace. The ancient technology designed by the precursors was beyond anything the hegemony could imagine. "Target their command ships only," ordered. "Disable, do not destroy. I want survivors." Captain Christopher Lane nodded and began selecting targets. The Sentinel's weapons fired again, precise beams that struck specific systems on the largest hegemony vessels. Engines went dark, weapons arrays shattered, communication systems failed. One by one, the command ships of the alien fleet fell silent, drifting helplessly in space. On the Eternal Dominion, felt his ship shudder as the human weapon tore through his engine section. Emergency, lights flickered to life as primary power failed. The bridge crew scrambled to restore systems that would never function again. Commander, his first officer, reported grimly, "We have lost propulsion, weapons, and long-range communications. We are dead in space." Stared at where the Sentinel hung like a god among insects. He had brought 400 warships to crush a primitive species. Now 88 of those ships were gone, erased from existence by a weapon he could not comprehend. The rest were either disabled or fleeing in terror. 200 years of victories meant nothing. His reputation meant nothing. The might of the hegemony meant nothing. The humans had won. Cole addressed the defeated fleet one final time. Her voice carried across every functioning communication system, reaching warriors who had expected easy conquest and found only humiliation. "Go home," she said. "Take your wounded. Gather your survivors. Return to High Ambassador Al and tell him what happened here. Tell him that humanity defended itself with a fraction of the power we now possess. Tell him that we chose mercy today, but we will not choose it again if he sends another fleet." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The age of the hegemony is over. You ruled through fear because no one was strong enough to oppose you. Now someone is. Spread the word to every species in your empire. Tell them that they do not have to kneel anymore. Tell them that humanity offers something the hegemony never did. Freedom." The surviving ships began to limp away, their hyperspace engines damaged but functional enough for the long journey home. They left behind the wreckage of 88 vessels and the shattered remains of hegemony pride. Watched them go without satisfaction. She had not wanted this battle. She had not wanted to kill thousands of alien warriors who were simply following orders. But she had done what was necessary to protect her people, and she would do it again if required. The Sentinel remained at its position, a guardian standing watch over the solar system. Behind it, Earth continued to orbit its sun, 8 billion people going about their lives without knowing how close they had come to slavery or extinction. Admiral Cole had made them a promise. She intended to keep it. 1 year had passed since the battle at the edge of the solar system. 1 year since humanity had shattered the myth of hegemony invincibility. 1 year since the galaxy had learned that the children of the precursors had finally awakened. Everything had changed. High Ambassador Al stood before the Grand Assembly for the last time. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides, and his once proud posture had crumbled into something resembling defeat. The crystalline chamber that had witnessed 300 years of his absolute authority now watched in silence as he prepared to speak words he had never imagined saying. I hereby resign my position as High Ambassador of the Hegemony Council. The assembly erupted into chaos. Delegates from 17 species shouted over each other, some demanding explanations, others celebrating his downfall. Al waited for the noise to fade before continuing. The humans have offered terms, not demands as we would have made, terms. They seek partnership rather than dominion, trade rather than tribute, cooperation rather than conquest. He paused, and for the first time in his long life, his voice carried something like humility. I recommend that we accept. On Earth, Ambassador Laura watched the broadcast from her office in the new Galactic Relations building. She smiled at the image of Al stepping down from his platform, replaced by a council of representatives from species that had spent centuries in fear. The hegemony was not dead, but it was transforming into something different, something better. Her communication device chimed, and she answered to find Admiral Cole looking back at her. It seems your diplomacy worked, Laura said with a tired smile. The Council has agreed to every point of your proposal. Laura shook her head. It was not my diplomacy that convinced them. It was your demonstration of what happens when they refuse to listen. She leaned back in her chair. How are things on the Sentinel? Quiet replied. We have had 17 delegations visit this month alone. They want to study our shield technology. They want to establish cultural exchange programs. Even they have sent representatives asking about trade agreements. She laughed softly. A year ago they wanted to enslave us. Now they want to be our partners. Fear is a powerful motivator. His expression grew serious. I do not want our relationships to be built on fear, Laura. That would make us no different than the hegemony. Laura nodded in agreement. That is why we offered terms instead of demands. That is why we asked for partnership instead of submission. The galaxy watched us defeat the most powerful military force in known space, and then they watched us extend our hand in friendship. That is what makes us different. The conversation ended, and Laura returned to her work. There were treaties to negotiate, trade agreements to draft, cultural misunderstandings to resolve. Building a new galactic order was exhausting work, but she would not trade it for anything. Across the galaxy, changes were happening faster than anyone had predicted. Species that had spent centuries paying tribute to the hegemony were now demanding their freedom. Labor colonies were being emptied, their populations returned to they had never seen. The fear that had held the old order together was dissolving, replaced by something new. Hope. On a planet called Prime, a young warrior named stood before a monument to his people's fallen. They had surrendered 60% of their population when they first joined the hegemony, and those taken had never returned. For generations, his species had mourned in silence, believing that resistance was impossible. Then the humans came. Had watched the recordings of the battle at Sol System. He had seen the Sentinel tear through 400 hegemony warships like they were nothing. He had heard Admiral Cole offer mercy to her defeated enemies. And he had listened to Ambassador's speech at the Grand Assembly, where she announced that humanity would help any species that wanted to reclaim their independence. They had been the first to accept. Now, 1 year later, Prime was free. Hegemony administrators had been escorted off-world. Tribute payments had stopped. Young were joining a new defense force, trained by human military advisors who treated them as equals rather than subjects. Placed his hand on the cold stone of the monument and made a promise to his ancestors. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Their children would never kneel again. Similar scenes were playing out across 1,000 worlds. The who had surrendered 70% of their population were rebuilding their civilization with human assistance. A species that the hegemony had nearly driven to extinction, were establishing new colonies on worlds they had been forced to abandon centuries ago. Even small species that had never dared to speak against the Council were finding their voices. The USS Sentinel continued to orbit Earth, a silent reminder of what humanity could do if threatened. But Cole had made it clear that the ship would never be used for conquest. It was a guardian, not a weapon of empire. Any species that asked for help would receive it. Any species that attacked humanity would regret it. Dr. Pierce had retired from active duty, his life's work complete. He spent his days at a small house in California, watching the sunset and remembering the young scientist who had once dreamed of understanding the universe. The artifact that had changed everything remained aboard the Sentinel, safely contained and carefully monitored. There were still secrets to uncover, still precursor technology to understand, still mysteries that would take centuries to solve. But that was work for the next generation. On the bridge of the Sentinel, Commander Daniel Hayes had taken over as captain, promoted after accepted a position as Earth's first galactic defense coordinator. He stood at the command station where she had once stood, looking out at the stars that had seemed so threatening just a year ago. The universe was still dangerous. There were species beyond hegemony space that had never heard of humanity, powers that might one day test human resolve. The precursor network contained technologies that could be used for terrible purposes if they fell into the wrong hands. But Daniel was not afraid. Humanity had faced extinction and refused to surrender. They had stood alone against an empire and emerged victorious. They had been offered the chance to become conquerors and chosen instead to become liberators. The galaxy would never be the same. Daniel looked down at Earth, the small blue world that had given birth to a species destined to change everything. 8 billion people living their lives, raising their children, dreaming their dreams. They did not know the details of what had happened in the darkness between stars. They only knew that they were safe. That was enough. The Sentinel continued its endless orbit, patient and watchful. Humanity's first warship had become humanity's first promise to the universe. We are here, we are strong, and we will never let you fall. The stars, once cold and distant, seemed almost warm now. Like a welcome. Like home.